Hello, welcome to the Digital Tabletop Festival. My name is Jupiter, and I'm interviewing Sandy Petersen, the head of Peterson Games, game design legend, creator of Call of Cthulhu RPG, Cthulhu Wars, and many, many more games. So hello, thank you for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Wonderful.
What are our topics? What are our topics today?
We've got so many topics to go through. We're going to go through a bunch of different games and stuff that you've created in the past and stuff that you have announced they're still working on now. Lots of stuff about Lovecraftian creatures. I'm very excited. So,
cool.
To start with, rumor has it you first encountered Lovecraft's work through a World War II armed service edition of Dunwich Horror and Other Weird Tales. Can you tell us all about that?
Yes. So about the history of the World War II thing, all I know is that the American military in World War II provided inexpensive books of various topics, including apparently Lovecraft, to our soldiers. I'm not sure how Lovecraft made them fight harder, but maybe it just made them happier while they were doing it.
Nothing like a little bit of horror to motivate them.
I guess. I mean, my father-in-law was there fighting, so I guess I doubt he read Lovecraft. But anyway, so what? But from my point of view, what happened? I'm 9 years old, and we're in a temporary house while the real house in the town we're going to live in is being built. We just moved into the town, and so my dad's books. He's a bookworm. Science fiction bookworm, they're all piled in big boxes in the basement. So I would go into these boxes. I was one of those annoying, precocious kids that no one likes, that reads a lot and has a big imagination. So I would go into the books, and I'd go through them looking at the covers and seeing if there was something cool that I could read. And so I came across this book, Dunwich Horror and Others. So I took it and had quite a lengthy intro, which annoyingly referenced Lovecraft stories that weren't in the book. But I took it there, and of course, being 9, I looked in the index for the shortest story to read, which was Pickman's Model, and I was amazed. I loved this story. Then I read The Outsider, the second shortest story, and then I started going into the longer ones. I read every story in the book, and was just I read Poe, I'd read other books. I even tried to read Moby Dick, but this was what was really impressive. It really hit me. And then I wanted to find more stories by him, and I couldn't. Could not find stories by him. And then this book vanished. And for 3 years, I had no idea where it was. And basically, I found one book that had like a couple Lovecraft stories in it, but basically Lovecraft was not available. At the age of 12, my friend who had borrowed the original book said, "Oh, I got this book 3 years ago. Here it is back." So I got that book back. And then at the age of 14, I found out that the local college library had a hardback Lovecraft. So I was able to go and check those out. Even I was just a junior high kid, but they let you do that and read them. And then a couple years after I started checking them out, I would check them out all the time, and no one else ever did. It was just me. The library found out that these were first edition Lovecrafts, because they were the very first. They were worth hundreds of dollars, and 14-year-old kids weren't going to check them out anymore. So I was banned from that, and that was sad. And then when I was 17, Ballantine came out with paperback editions of Lovecraft. And I found out about it when I was on a trip to New York with my dad. He was going to a doctor's convention, and I was planning to explore New York, but instead I went to the bookstore, bought the Lovecraft books, and stayed in the hotel room reading them.
Wow.
And from then on, I had copies of Lovecraft. So I think part of the reason I like Lovecraft so much is the multi-year quest I had to go on to get him. But I did have the privilege, which is probably impossible today, of reading the Call of Cthulhu without knowing what a Cthulhu was.
Yeah.
It's just a mysterious syllable. And I what is this? And then it's a surprise when he comes out. It's a surprise that he's big. All this stuff that is now probably not easy to do, but
sometime, yeah. That's a really interesting story around these books.
Yeah. My dad read science fiction. I don't know why he got the Lovecraft book, but I'm glad he did. He didn't have a lot of horror. I kind of had to go down that road on my own. He had a few bits of horror. He mostly had science fiction.
Yeah, but I totally understand how having that quest to find really continued to captivate and almost make a story out of a story, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm very sympathetic to the crazy horror hero who is trying to track down some ancient weird book or spell or ritual or something, the antiquarian guys. it just makes sense to me. I see the draw.
That's really cool. Obviously, that interest led you to Chaosium. Chaosium? Yeah, I've said that right?
Well, my games led me to Chaosium eventually, because I was also the gaming thing. Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to stay in from recess to play like Clue or something, and then in the when I was a teenager, I found out about Avalon Hill War games. I'd play a lot of those. They were fun. And then in 1974, the year that Dungeons & Dragons came out, we started playing Dungeons & Dragons. And we played and other role-playing games, the ancient primitive role-playing games that you had in the 70s we played. And we started really liking this game from Chaosium called RuneQuest. And eventually, a friend of mine who'd met Greg Stafford encouraged me to write to Greg and phone Greg, and Greg published a few things of mine, and then I proposed doing a source book for RuneQuest that was set in Lovecraft's Dreamlands, because I figured Lovecraft's Dreamlands has swords, doesn't have cars, it's kind of a fantasy thing. Maybe it'd be a fun world, but he said he wasn't going to do that because he actually had the rights to do Lovecraft as a like full-on Lovecraft in the modern times, and he would rather do that.
Aye, okay. Interesting route to take it in the modern times.
He has someone signed up to do it already. And then that person... What? Go ahead.
I said that's a shame.
Well, what happened is that he wrote... I was keen on finding out something about this Lovecraft game. I was super interested in it. I'd actually done a homebrew game I called American Gothic, which was a horror, kind of a generic horror game, but it did have Lovecraftian things. But that was not for publication. It was just like, because role-playing rules in the 70s were so bad, you kind of had to make up your own anyway.
Yeah.
I'd done that. And so Greg wrote back and said, I don't like the stuff the guy is doing that's writing on it, so I will just give you the whole project.
Oh, wow.
So I got the whole project. And that was the first full game I ever did.
Ah. That's quite amazing.
Took me a year on a typewriter. No computers for us. Yep. It wasn't an electric typewriter, so there's that. But
well,
I walked to my wife's place of work and used her electric typewriter.
It's a pretty unique thing to type on, an electric typewriter.
That's
fun though.
There were literally no computers, right? Computers were giant mainframe things that you couldn't type on anyway, and they had blinking lights. It was just like Star Trek.
Just like Star Trek. But anyway, so from there you ended up making a Call of Cthulhu RPG. And decades after you've created this game, it's still got a strong following. It's still going very strong. Why do you think that this is the case when other systems made around that time have faded away?
Even more recent systems, right? Well, I think that the trick to Call of Cthulhu is going... Now here, you got to understand that when I did Call of Cthulhu, I thought it would be an obscure cult game that would go through maybe two... I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I just thought... I was just making the game that I really wanted to play. Okay, that's what I always try to do, is make the game I want to play and hope there's enough people who are bent like me that they will also like it.
Enough people searching after this book for 3 years, hoping. I don't
think about the market or what will be mainstream. I just I want to play this game, so I'll do it. So that's what I did with Call of Cthulhu. And but what I did with Call of Cthulhu is first off, I thought, I think the thing that appeals to it is that it's contrarian. Instead of your character getting stronger over time and mightier and killing ever bigger monsters, your character gets crappier over time and starts going insane and getting cursed and losing limbs until he's useless. Instead of seeking out glorious battle to triumph, you are trying your best to avoid the glorious battle. And if a battle does happen, it's usually like the climax of the scenario and you're terrified during the whole thing. And usually the battle is something along the lines of, hold off the ghouls while we pour cement into the well, or we blow up the altar, or whatever, right? It's not really a fight. Instead of your characters being heroic people who are better than the others around them, they're blighted by their knowledge of the truth and just ordinary Joes. They don't have... they might be like a professor or something, but they're not extra human anyway.
They're far more relatable.
Magic items are bad, generally speaking. You're sad when you have one. The treacherous things that it's just like everything is different. But the thing is, if you want to play a role-playing game where you kill the monsters and you get stronger and then you keep going through that cycle, literally every other role-playing game does that. But if you want a role-playing game that doesn't do that for a change of pace, that mimics horror movies and horror stories, and then Call of Cthulhu is kind of the only thing you can go to. So I think the mistake of a lot of the other horror games is that they saw Call of Cthulhu's flaw as being that you got killed a lot and you went insane and you weren't strong. So they did their horror game, like Chill did this, in imitation of the regular stuff. So in effect, it was just like D&D or whatever, except with a different set of monsters.
Like a different skin.
And, yeah, it was an action movie with a horror element, in effect. But Call of Cthulhu stayed the game that you played if you're creepy. And I think one of the other things that made Call of Cthulhu strong is I think partly because of the fact that it is not, like testosterone based, a competition in killing the monsters based. It had a remarkably high percentage of female players. Much more than the D&D typically. It's more now, but back in the day, it was like if you got 5-10% of your players that were female, that was astonishing. And almost all the girls that showed up at Gen Con were like girlfriends or wives, not actual players. Now there's a lot more actual players, but Call of Cthulhu from the start was like 30-40% women, which in turn attracted more men, right? And so, for example, today, I found out last November that Call of Cthulhu is the single biggest role-playing game in Japan.
Oh, wow.
It's bigger than D&D, bigger than anything else. So I was there with my wife, and we went to a gaming convention of role-playing stuff, and it was majority women.
Wow.
They made me play in a game, and the game master was a girl, and the players were girl. They were Japanese girls, so I can't tell how old they are. Somewhere between 15 and 45, right? But it was really interesting. They were the people that were publishing their scenarios were female, and it was really an interesting peak. There were some men around, but it was the reverse usual world. And I think it's because Call of Cthulhu is the number one game there. That's the game that you go into when you're role playing, and so it is naturally women like horror movies as much as men do, right?
Yep.
And so I think that it, but they may not want a movie about Conan beating up the monsters, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the reasons it's good. Contrarian and girl. By the way, I will say I wasn't constantly trying to make it appeal to women. I just wanted to make it like a horror movie.
Yeah, women just liked it. Yeah.
Well, they do like it,
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm saying women just liked it.
And the heroes are never able to be, like a big hulky jerk, because those guys get killed off so fast in Call of Cthulhu that,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell us a bit more about the early days of Call of Cthulhu's launch back in 1981? What did you expect to happen, and what ended up happening?
The typesetter had a nervous breakdown, and when they finally got it ready for release and they started to print it, it was Friday the 13th in November, and there was mysterious power outages just in the part of the city where we were doing Call of Cthulhu. So that became the running joke at Chaosium, the curse of Cthulhu. And from then on, every time any other odd thing happened with Call of Cthulhu, it was the curse of Cthulhu, and like that. So that was fun. Well, here's a fun fact about early Call of Cthulhu. So, in 1981, like, no one really had heard of Lovecraft. Every single person I knew who heard of Lovecraft was someone that I had told them about. That's how they
You recommended it.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. And the general attitude of Lovecraft was that he was a terrible hack from the 1930s, unworthy of serious consideration. But Chaosium had the license. And the thing is, the guys at Chaosium shared this opinion. They thought Lovecraft was a terrible hack. Okay?
Okay.
And so 9 out of 10 companies, if they're going to do a game based on a license they don't respect, would have done a game that was kind of snarky about it and made fun of it a little bit and was a little bit edgy and basically like, obviously you can't like this guy that we're making fun of. Kind of like Batman and Robin, right?
Yeah.
The movie where they brought in a director who didn't love Batman, and so he set the whole thing making fun of Batman because obviously no one can really like Batman because I don't, right?
Yeah.
So that's how most games. But Chaosium under Greg was so smart. They said, we know we don't respect Lovecraft. We don't think he's worthy of respect. We want to do a game on him. So that means we can't be the authors. We have to hire someone who does respect Lovecraft, so they'll do it right. And that's what they brought me in. They didn't tell me they didn't respect Lovecraft. That was their little secret. They just said
that would have been a bit insulting, I bet, if they did.
Well, probably. But when I did eventually learn to love Lovecraft, right? At least in part because it became their biggest hit. But they actually were so smart they got someone else to do the job that they knew they couldn't. So that I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's
when I found out that's what they did.
Well, it's a good thing you ended up taking charge there, and that Lovecraft got sort of the recognition, I guess, and place that it deserved.
Yeah, Lovecraft Film Festival, they gave me an award. In fact, let me quick go get it.
Okay.
It's my Howie.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Give it to me for Howie Award for Lifetime Achievement. C. Sandy Petersen, which is not my name, but they meant it to be my name, so their heart's in the right place. He's got a little whiteness there because part of his collar broke, sadly, when I was taking him home to the airport. But what they gave it to me for is they said I got the second one. The first one went to Stuart Gordon, and they said, but I wasn't at that event, so maybe I would have gotten to have been there. But they said that in 1981, Call of Cthulhu came out and started seeping through game nerd culture. As the game, even if you didn't play Call of Cthulhu, you knew about it. It influenced what you were doing, right? I know, for example, that during the 80s at TSR, the company that did D&D, they only played Call of Cthulhu in their own games. They didn't play their own game. So, I mean, they told me this, right? So I was like, that's kind of cool. So it was creeping through culture. Then, 1985, Reanimator comes out by Stuart Gordon. And it's like the first good Lovecraft movie. And this starts going through movie geek culture, right? And so both these things are going through the subconscious of American fan culture. And about the same time, you have Mr. Yoshi doing his essays on Lovecraft, his scholarly essays. I don't know how many people they reached, but they did make it possible to intellectually defend liking Lovecraft. Was the point. He pointed, right? And so all these three things combined, and suddenly Lovecraft caught fire. And now, I mean, he's Lovecraft stuff, and Cthulhu is pretty well known. And so they decided it was equally me and Stuart Gordon that made Lovecraft famous. I'll take it. I did it earlier, though. I'll say that. Mine came out earlier than his did, but I will say he mattered too.
Yeah. And as you said, everyone knows what Cthulhu is. Everyone knows what Cthulhu is. So it's like a household name.
It's a household name.
It is.
Which you can't read Call of Cthulhu today with the same experience I had.
Yeah. I mean, I work for
famous. I'll take as a trade-off there.
I work for a Roblox gaming company as well, and we're making like little outfits for your characters. And one of the things that was said in chat last week was there's not enough Cthulhu clothing in the shop. We need to make sure there's a bit more of it. So even in small games like Roblox, well, even in small sub games,
like Wilbur Whately or whatever. Yeah. Well, Lovecraft has I'm happy to have. I mean, I guess I made a difference for Lovecraft's knowledge at least. For one thing, it was Chaosium's royalties that funded the ST Yoshi's re-edited versions of the Arkham House Lovecraft books. So we got the best versions of Lovecraft ever, partly thanks to my game.
It's wonderful.
Plus, lots of people like it, and of course, the single most common thing I hear at conventions is someone telling me that they got into Lovecraft or even into role playing because of my game. So that's
That must be really heartwarming.
But it is what it is.
Going away from that, the next bit that I would like to talk about is going from that, as per the event theme, the physical to the digital. You worked at Microprose, where you got credits on a number of games. Yes.
I went to Microprose in 1988 from Chaosium in an attempt to support my family, which was up to 4 children.
Wow.
and the Chaosium income was teeny. So it was purely mercenary was the goal.
Okay.
I did like playing digital games, but
Well,
you probably have interrupted you. Sorry.
It's okay. You're fine. Speaking of, I guess, digital games, what sort of development work were you doing on Sid Meier's Pirates? It seems to be a roaming adventure, open world feel type of game.
It is, and actually the work I did on that is that I was brought on. The Pirates was actually already published, and they were doing the version for the Macintosh. And my job was to make the Macintosh version good because Sid Meier had better things to do. So I had to change the controls so that they all worked just with a mouse with one button, because that's all you could have. I had to make the fights still be fun. The programming, the actual software was completely different from the previous versions, which were other computers. And so I had to, I wasn't a programmer, but I had to go and besiege Sid Meier and say, Sid, you have to make this one change in the fighting algorithm or whatever it is I need to do. So I learned a lot about testing and adapting for that, which was the goal. So it taught me a lot about being a digital game designer, but I would say that 100% of the credit for Sid Meier's Pirates goes to Sid Meier, not me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I did have more influence on his game Civilization, and that one I actually took a bigger role. And I did think, I invented the Elvises for Sid Meier's Civilization, and I helped him balance it. I was one of the first people to realize that Gandhi was a horrible nuclear maniac that constantly wanted to bomb things, and then we didn't change it because Sid was entertained by that. I think he thought it was logical that if you were a complete pacifist that built no military but had nukes, then if you were attacked physically, your only recourse would be the nukes.
Yeah.
Which I thought actually has real world validity. That having an on the ground military lets you avoid nukes rather than creating them. So that was interesting. I mean, it's only from a game, but still, I did some other things for Microprose. Eventually, Microprose, the guy in charge went stark raving mad, and then I fled the burning ship for id Software.
Yeah. So I guess that answers how did that come about. The move was just getting off a burning ship.
Well, I was checking out several places to possibly go, and a friend of mine at Microprose, Jeff Billings, knew the guys at id Software and knew they were looking for a designer, or at least to interview a designer. So I went there to get an interview, and what had actually happened is that the guys at id Software had decided that designers were bad and they shouldn't have them. This is very early. When I went to Microprose, I was one of the first people in the industry to have the name designer that wasn't also a programmer, right? Designers, no one knew what exactly to do. So I went to id Software, and id Software decided that they didn't like the current designer. So they said, designers are bad. We just want to have artists build our levels. Okay. So this is what the programmers thought. The artists said, no, we want an actual designer. And the problem with our designer isn't that designers are bad. It's that we don't have the right designer for this job. So basically, as a sop to the artists, the programmers brought me in to see what I could do, expecting that my stuff would suck and that they could then hire the artist. And what happened is that I didn't know any of this. And so I just started designing a level using their DoomEd software. And what I had done was vastly more than the artists are done. Their previous artists had done a spiral staircase. That was his whole thing. And I had almost an entire level done by the end of the week. You can go into, and there's tricks and traps and moving floors and monsters ambushing you. And so that got me my job there. And then I went from there working like a fiend to produce 20 of the 27 levels for Doom in 3 months.
Wow. So did you do also level design on Doom 2 when you worked on that?
Yes, I did. Well, here's the thing. I did 2 different types of design work. We didn't even know that level designer was a thing yet. We just had designers, right? So I did most of the levels in Doom 1. I did most of the levels in Doom 2. I did 17 of the 32 levels in Doom 2. And which is slightly more than half. But I also did things like I named the levels. I figured out how many hit points the monsters have. I figured out how much damage the weapons did. I figured out what the name. Right. I did all kinds of. I ordered the levels from first to last. I did a lot of that kind of mid-level design stuff because I was, their designer. So
yeah. So it seems like quite a jump going from pen and paper RPGs to video games to first-person shooter games specifically.
Yes, that came about because I was actually recruited from Chaosium by Lawrence Schick, who used to work at TSR, and he knew who I was and he liked my stuff, So at that time, because they were trying to basically create the job of computer game designer at Microprose, as a separate profession from programmer. Or obviously, programmers also do design. Artists also do design. Designers do design, and they're the guys that only do design, I guess. But to find designers, they were pillaging the paper game industry. So all of us at Microprose Software came from the paper game industry. So my initial experience in learning how to do it digitally was eased by the fact that every single other person at the company was doing it that way, was also learning how to do it. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not like designing a computer game and designing a tabletop game is so different that you must learn entirely. I mean, things are different. You have to learn how to script in a computer version, which you don't in tabletop. But some of the things also work the other way around, because when I finally left the digital world in 2011, I took with me elements I'd learned from digital stuff back to the tabletop. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Staying on sort of the digital stuff, we all assume that the Lovecraftian creatures in Quake were part of your work there as well?
Spot on. That is correct. Yeah. Lovecraftian creatures in Quake are from me. That's why Shub-Niggurath looks like a Dark Young, a monster I invented for Call of Cthulhu. It's why there's a Shambler. And part of that is also because, for part of the art stuff for our artists, I brought in my book, Sandy Petersen's Peterson's Field Guide to Monsters, which was the art book we made in 1987 at Chaosium, and I brought it in and showed it off, and so the picture we had of the Shambler in that book is very similar to the Shambler that we had in Quake, and the picture we had of the Dark Young in that book was very similar to the Shub-Niggurath, and even the Chthon monster at the end of the first episode of Quake is kind of based off of Gug.
That's pretty cool that you got to put so many of your characters into that, so many of the characters that you helped sort of create the look of.
My secret goal, which I have occasionally failed at, is to put something Lovecraftian into every game, even if it is not a Lovecraft game.
It's a very good goal, a little piece of you.
Well, here's an example. In the game Age of Empires 3, which is about the colonization of the New World, you would think there would not be a lot of room for Lovecraft stuff. But what I did was, one of my jobs in Age 3 was to name you start with an Indian scout. And the Indian scout has a random Indian tribe that it can be. So on my job, one of my jobs was to make the list of Indian tribes that you'd pull from. So I added the Miskatonic tribe to it.
That's very clever.
And I almost got caught because the guy was playing it, one of the other designers, and he noticed that there was a Miskatonic tribe. And of course, he'd been reading up on Indians lots because he's doing this game, and he said, "The Miskatonic tribe? What's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's an obscure East Coast tribe. You probably wouldn't have heard of it." And I got away with it. So
wonderful. He didn't spend any time researching it.
I didn't need to.
No, I mean he didn't. He didn't.
Well, he did. He actually, yeah, exactly. So that was glorious for me. So I got the Miskatonic 10. I probably had the chops to actually push it through, even if he caught me.
Yeah.
But it's more fun to have them not know.
More fun to sneak it in. Moving from Doom 2, Quake, you moved on to Ensemble, as you mentioned, where you worked on Age of Empires.
Yes.
How did you start working on Age of Empires?
I was pulled in the last few weeks of Age of Empires 1, in which I basically did nothing except a few playtests, and started working on a RTS game called Sorceress, which was about magical things. Eventually, we were unable to pull off Sorceress. And so I had the idea to do the expansion pack for Age of Empires 1, which was the Rise of Rome. And Microsoft fought against it. Oh, no one buys expansion packs. And I said, I think they will buy expansion packs. And that was based on my experience with Call of Cthulhu, where in fact the expansions and the scenarios sold much more in total, not individually, than the original game. So I said, no, they'll buy this. And it'd be a lot cheaper to make. And you have a small project, because I only had a small group of guys. So anyway, so we did it, and it sold like a third as many copies of the original game, which was a huge success because of how cheap it was to make. And then when we did Age of Empires 2, Microsoft came to us and said, we have learned that expansion packs are big hits, and you should do one. We're like, yeah, who taught you that? So I did that expansion pack. That was the Conquerors, and then I was on Age 2, and I was in charge of all the playtesting. I was one of the lead designers. Sometimes I was the lead designer, like on the expansions. And I also did Halo Wars. So I did a lot of time learning how to balance strategy games sometimes with small elements of change, sometimes bigger elements of change, and I learned how to deal with the team. And all of that became useful when I later on started to do giant strategy games for my own tabletop company.
Age of Empires is actually the first PC game I ever saw being played.
Oh, cool! Did you see the lions hunting antelope in it?
I wasn't allowed to watch much of it. When I was a kid, my family didn't do computers at all, and I used to go visit my great-grandfather, who had a computer for my cousin Robbie, and he used to just sit there and play Age of Empires all the time, and me being like the little brat cousin annoying my older cousin, I'd come and be like, what are you doing? What's that? What are you doing? And he'd go, I'm playing games. You can't play. You're not old enough. Go back. Go play with your cousins. And he used to always be playing it. And at one point, he let me play for like not a whole lot of time with no instructions, not helping me at all. And then he was like, see, you won't like it.
Eaten by wolves, maybe, is what often happens.
I'm pretty sure I died quite fast. And he was like, see, you don't like it. You don't like it. And I was like, okay, sorry, Robbie.
What a meanie.
Yeah.
So
cousins always pick on each other.
Yes, they do. And I guess that's how the human race is designed to work. But yeah, so our greatest triumph with Age of Empires, in my opinion, was we decided. So the game so E3 always had an award for best graphics in the game, and this always goes to something like Myst, or a first-person shooter or some game like that. And we said, we're going to win it for an RTS game, real-time strategy. And that famously, they never win that because they're little tiny figures on a little tiny map, and they all repeat it, and you can't do it. So we said, for Age 3, we're going to get the best graphics, and we put our all into it, and it won. And people were all the way with heck. You could shoot a cannon at a castle and watch it falling apart and catching on fire, and all. It was just like is amazing, epic sweep of a game, and so we're very proud of that. Age 3 did not sell as many copies as Age 2, but we never sold less than 1 million copies of anything we did at Ensemble.
It was still a success.
So it was still, it was a huge success.
Yeah.
I think Halo Wars sold 3 million. That was our swan song. We actually finished that knowing that we were all going to be canned by internal evils of Microsoft.
Age of Empires is obviously more historical and less fantastical than a lot of your other work. How did you go from making such fantasy games into making more historical games?
Well, one of my jobs at Ensemble was to be the guy that knew everything about history, because I was kind of a history buff. So whenever they wanted to know something, I was the guy they'd come to. They would say, do longbows have a longer range or a shorter range than crossbows? That kind of thing. I would give historical things. So I made up the campaigns for the game. So, for example, in English, we usually only get information on the 100 Years' War about the battles that England won halfway through. So I said, no, we're going to do it right. The French won the war. They should get credit for it. And Joan of Arc is amazingly better than any other character in the whole war, except possibly Falstaff. So we did a story on Age of Empires on Joan of Arc, and we ended it up with the massive French victories at like Castillon and stuff, where they just hammered the English. And it's pretty glorious if you've been playing the French all through the campaign and being massacred by those damn longbowmen to finally set up a massive cannons and just to send those guys flying. So we did that. We did Admiral Yi Sun Sin from Korea, for which our guy almost got arrested because we called the Sea of Japan in our map. And apparently every country in the world says it's the Sea of Japan except for one, and they call it the Sea of Korea. They got mad at us for saying the wrong name because that was politically suspect.
So So it was like an embedded interest in history.
I have quite an interest in history, yes.
And
So
what big learnings did you...
right now that you probably didn't know?
Sorry?
Here's a fun history fact for you right now you probably didn't know.
Okay.
The king of Greece in the 1920s was killed by a monkey.
How was he killed by a monkey?
There was 2 monkeys loose at this park that he was taking his wife and his dog to, and the monkeys attacked the dog, and he tried to save the dog, and the monkeys bit him badly, and they got infected, and it killed him.
Wow, what a way to go!
He may be the only king in history to be killed by a monkey.
By monkeys. Definitely something to be known for. Surely we should all know this.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the kind of historical fact I delved into. So I also got interested in history originally because as a teenager, I was playing the Avalon Hill War games, which are the most complicated, interesting games around. So they were all historical in theory. You know, Battle of the Bulge, Midway, things like that. So I started looking up what these were talking about and got some knowledge of that. And then that led me into being the go-to guy at Age of Empires, where people would come to me all the time and ask historical facts. So.
And what big learnings did you take from working on video games as a designer?
The number one thing I learned was to play test the game incessantly, to get an early version of the game up and running as quickly as possible. Not all digital guys do that, but Ensemble did. But we always get our version up running really early. So I always get a version of my board game up as early as possible, almost just like embryonic stage, and then immediately start playing it. And every time I play, the next game there's a change. I did that with the digital games too. And one of the results of that in the digital field is that our games took longer to develop than a normal game, because a normal game you wait till you do the end, then you start playtesting it. We were playtesting it early and constantly making changes as we went along. But the advantage we got from that is that our games were always massive hits. We never had a flop, because when our game went out, we always knew it was fun, because we've been playing it for like a year and a half. So my board games, I do that same trick too. I get it out as early as possible, playtest like crazy, get right, and then I also learned how to listen to playtesters, which is not the way that playtesters think we listen to them.
Okay, how do you listen to playtesters?
I listen to the complaints they have and the problems they have. I don't listen to the solutions they present, because their problems are real problems, and they identify actual difficulties in the game. Their suggestions are almost always, not always, but almost always not going to be effective and not going to work, or they'll break something else. I also learned that teenagers cannot communicate in any way for a playtest. Preteen can. You get a 10-year-old, he'll give you useful stuff. A teenager can only grunt, or say it was fun. And then after teenagers, they can once again communicate. But there's that period of time when they can't tell you anything.
Okay. So do you know about how many iterations?
What?
Sorry. Do you know how many iterations you go through when you're playtesting, like iterations of the game before it comes to market?
There's one iteration every single time I do a playtest. And the way I tell that I'm done playtesting is if I've gone through 3 or 4 playtests and not made a change.
Okay.
So I'll see. Call of Cthulhu. How many years did you playtest that for, Lincoln? My assistant. Yeah, year and a half, a year and a half at least. 2 years. 2 years. Wow. 3 playtests a week. So what's that? About 6,000 versions? Wow.
And are they always new playtesters?
No. They're the same playtesters. Well, I have three different playtest groups, and they each had different assets and weaknesses. Like one of the groups was actually good at identifying fixes, which, like I said, most groups don't. Other ones weren't. But so I would play it 2 or 3 times a week, and every test there'd be a change, and I would take it back. The new change to go to the next group, which is a different group. The next change to go to yet a different group. So I only had 3 groups, but they all came into it from different directions. And I actually found it useful to have people who were experienced in the game playing it. It's not every test needs to be a blind test where they never played it. In fact, that's not when I'm trying to do balance. That's not really very necessary. And I had enough new people show up. I got to see what a new person would view the game as. Right. So yeah. Okay. The main thing you need to check a new person on is if they can read the rules, and the rules aren't even done until the playtesting is done. So I'm kind of screwed there anyway.
That's a fair comment. And that kind of brings us towards today, where you've had a huge hit on Kickstarter for Cthulhu Wars. Can you describe the game for those who haven't heard of it or don't know about it?
In 2013, I left digital games and founded a board game company, which is now called Peterson Games. And I launched a crowdfunding campaign for a tabletop strategy game called Cthulhu Wars. And the motivation behind this was twofold. One was that I was expecting that this would be my last game I would ever do that I would design by myself. And then I would go to India and design and help a digital company there make phone games. They give me a really good deal. A part of the company was a great gig. And then Cthulhu Wars, I thought Cthulhu Wars which was a strategy game about the Cthulhu monsters, would sell maybe $200,000, $300,000 worth, and I would have that as a useful income stream. But instead, it did over $1 million, and I had to call the Indians and stay here. And then I founded a company out of it, and it's based on a concept I've thought of a lot in the past, which is that in the Lovecraft stories and in Call of Cthulhu, you'd never the game always ends either in disaster because Cthulhu rose, or in triumph because you stopped him from rising. You never get to see Cthulhu present with all his toys, telepathy blanketing the earth, mountains of protoplasm in the sea, earthly geometry messing up. So I wanted to see that. I'd done a couple of Call of Cthulhu campaigns set in like after the Holocaust when Cthulhu comes back. So I wanted to do a whole game about that. But then the problem is, how do you fight Cthulhu? And the answer was, you can't. You have other things like Cthulhu to fight. So we have the King in Yellow and Nyarlathotep and all these other things, and they're the opponents. So I wanted to make the game be highly asymmetrical and feel like it was broken when you were playing one of the civs. You're like, wow, I'm so powerful, nothing can stop me. And have the civs, have the factions feel very different, which I'm told I pulled off. So that was our flagship game. And then after that, we went on to do other games and of various types. One of the ones we just released, and we actually had a crowdfunding thing going on for just recently. Pretty soon it'll open up in the Pledge Manager, is Planet Apocalypse, which kind of harkens back to Doom. It's modern age, hell rising up with demons, and the demons are creepy Keith Thompson demons. He works with Guillermo del Toro, so they're very medieval looking with faces on weird parts of the anatomy and animal bits and just terrifying demons. And it's a cooperative game where you and your team must fight these hordes of hell. It's part tower defense, it's part farm, and it has gotten pretty amazing reviews. It's recently, for some reason, a bunch of German sites have started talking it up. And my favorite German review was this guy that started up, and his copy came, and because shipping is bad, some of the demons had broken a foot. And so he was angry that the game was broken, which, who can blame him, right? Yeah. So it's the game, and he starts off very out of sorts. And he starts playing it and reviewing it, and by the end of the review, he's like gushing about how much he loves it, and it's fabulous game that's so good, and everything about it's great. And he's totally forgotten about the fact that it came broken. But
can forgive those broken feet.
Yeah, he didn't care about the broken feet anymore. He knew we'd make it good because we always do. But it was I still listen to all my reviews. I still cry at the bad reviews. I still gloat at the good reviews. So that was a good review, and I got to gloat at it. And so that game has done really well. Also coming up, we have our game Hyperspace, which is outer space, space empires. And one of the features of this game, and it's only a feature of it, it's not the center of it, is that Lovecraft's monsters are, of course, not supernatural. They're aliens, a lot of them, right? Yeah. So some of the aliens in this Hyperspace game are the Lovecraft aliens. So there's the Fungi from Yuggoth and the Starspawn. There are only 5 races out of 25, but hey, they're there, so...
Can you talk more about that and what the design philosophy behind that is, bringing your Cthulhu Wars characters into hyperspace?
Well, the design philosophy initially was that my idea about aliens is that they should be really alien and different from humans. I don't think any aliens would ever be humanoid. I don't think they'd have psychologies like us. And of course, Lovecraft had already opened my mind to the idea of things that are from different dimensions or that are from different laws of nature or other kinds of matter. So, what I wanted to do in this game was have aliens that were each really bizarre and weird. So, for example, one of the aliens in the core game is the Skith, and the Skith has the power to time travel. So, logically, there's only one Skith who time travels, and if he needs 1 million people to build a spaceship, He goes back in time a day, then he goes back in time a day again, and he keeps repeating it till he has 1 million guys, then they build the ship. He has no ability to communicate, because why would you need that? Everyone can. They don't have to communicate, so they can't communicate anyone else either. They're totally solipsistic. And if he finds out that the star's going to explode and everyone's going to die working on the spaceship, the guy that finds that out goes, oh, okay, and he gets a ship and he leaves the rest behind to die, because who cares? He can time travel and get more, right? So the Skith are this predatory thing that their abilities in the game are to travel in time. Then I have that he's not Lovecraftian, but he's really weird. There's guys that have mind. There's humans too. The backstory of the game is that in the Cthulhu Wars, Cthulhu overthrew Earth and took it over. So the star spawn homeworld in the game is Earth, except now it's inhabited by Cthulhu monsters. And the human homeworld is this asteroid, and their ships are big cold sleep ships carrying the last remnants of humanity. So the humans are rare and unusual, and the aliens are common and teeming. But the humans have their own abilities, right? They're cool. So that's one of the things I have in the game that I really like is something I introduced in Planet Apocalypse, which is I gave it's really common for alien race, for your civilization in a game to have a strength, right? Something that's good for them. I gave him a strength, but I also gave him flaws. So like Cthulhu has to slumber periodically in the game. So he has to take turns where he's not doing anything because he's asleep. The Skith gets mixed up on what his time stream is. So it's harder for him to research science, because like he can't remember if the wheel came first or if he needs the transistor, And so they all have these different, the fungi from Yuggoth are contra-terrene, so they can't use atomics or metal until they spent all their organics. And everyone has these weird flaws. And that I found that the people own their flaws and like them, and it gives them personality to have this drawback. So it's a trick that I started doing in a lot of my games, giving characters flaws. And the interesting flaw can be as good as a virtue. So
it makes them more relatable. It seems like a lot of your games are just more relatable, have more relatable aspects, despite being, huge creatures and horrifying.
Yeah. Well, really what it boils down to is that, like I said earlier, I play games I want to play. I don't view myself as the creator on Mount Olympus who is doling out the glorious games and my genius to people like say Peter Molyneux, right? Instead, I'm just another fan. And because there wasn't a giant space game which you could play in an hour and a half, I had to make one so I could play it. And then if there's other people like me, they can play it too, and that's cool. And if they give me money for it, that means I can keep doing it. So not everyone can be a game designer. So I guess I'm doing it for those that can't be, and hopefully making the games they like too. So as an example with Cthulhu Wars, Cthulhu Wars has giant, brightly colored plastic figures of Cthulhu monsters. In fact, I am now the world's largest purveyor of Cthulhu monster figures.
Wow.
I've done like 6 different versions of Cthulhu alone, and I have all these weird monsters that have never been done before, right? But I now have them, but when I was a kid, my favorite toy was plastic dinosaurs, like a lot of kids. But after I'd read Call of Cthulhu, I wanted to have a plastic Cthulhu, but I couldn't have one, and I could never get one, and there was never one available. So finally, I made one, and now I have a plastic Cthulhu. And when my grandchildren play with it, well, actually, the granddaughters play with the plastic Cthulhus and stuff. And since they're little girls, and this is going to sound sexist, but it's their choice, not mine. Like, this is the daddy monster, and this is the mommy monster, and here's the baby monsters, and they kind of play with the monsters, which I think is hysterical.
That's hilarious. That's actually hilarious.
The 8-year-old kids, and they're going, rah, rah, rah,
It's wonderful. And obviously, a lot of your games have been funded through Kickstarter. How do you feel that Kickstarter has changed the board game industry?
Well, Kickstarter has enabled board games to exist that could never have existed before. For example, Call of Cthulhu Wars. Nobody would ever have published Cthulhu Wars. I know, because it was almost published by Fantasy Flight. At the last minute, they said it was too expensive and too big, and they couldn't do it. So it literally can only exist because people supported it on Kickstarter. Now, Kickstarter isn't perfect. It's got flaws, but it does enable a creator with a vision to share that vision and get his ducks in order. And of course, it can be abused, right? And it has been abused. But at its best, it enables us to do games that we couldn't have done before, and it's revolutionized the world of board games, which is cool.
That's a very good resource to have.
Yes.
What challenges do you see in COVID-19 for the board game industry?
Well, I mean, the main challenge is that it has cost my company hundreds of thousands of dollars because the brick and mortar stores are all closed up, and a lot of them have died, right? It literally kills them. For the first time ever, we had distributors returning copies of our games from their warehouse to us because they couldn't sell them on. And that's not even a thing we have in the contract. They just did it and expected us to which we did. We were good about it. So it's been tough. We did get 2 financial benefits from the government. First time I've ever gotten something good from the U.S. government. The first one was that they gave us 2 months of salary to pay our personnel with the restriction that we can't lay anyone off, which I think is a fair restriction. If they're going to give you salary, you shouldn't lay them off, right? So I was okay with that. And then they also gave us a small business loan, which I also approve of. And that we do have to pay back probably. It may depend on which party wins the election, whether we have to pay it back or not, but the terms are easy, so.
It's definitely been a lot of changes during COVID, which has lasted.
Yeah. We put our games up on Tabletop Simulator so people can play them there. We've sell more digital stuff. We've noticed the role-playing stuff is doing pretty good. Maybe because people can do they do Zoom for role-playing. Tabletop is more of a challenge.
Role-playing can be done through like Discord, and even Twitch streamers are role-playing with their Twitch audiences nowadays. But tabletops have been quite difficult because no one can get together anymore.
Yeah, I know. My own role-playing game, we're playing a new role-playing game I've designed, which is based in the hyperspace universe, and we have to do it by Zoom. So it's actually a pain. It's not as easy as in person. It's harder to read what a player is doing or thinking. And I'm a kind of game master that's really I try very much to have it be going back and forth between me and the players. So
has that changed like playtesting as well? Because you do a lot of playtesting.
Yes, I'm doing less playtesting, and what I do is mostly on Tabletop Simulator. And in fact, mostly I make my my associate designer Lincoln do it for me. So I hope you've got a bunch of playtests set up this week, Lincoln. You got a bunch of playtests set up this week? Yeah. He says yes.
Yeah, I could hear him. He says he does.
He's the strong silent type. So we got those going.
Good. Glad you can still sort of keep some of the stuff in motion.
You're keeping some of the stuff in motion, but we're also crossing our fingers and hoping that one of the many people claiming to be working on a vaccine pull it off.
Yeah.
I have stayed free of it so far by siloing up at home. My daughter did catch it, but all she had was a bad cold, so it wasn't very exciting. It was just like she had a bad cold, and they checked it, and they said it was COVID.
Oh, okay.
She is a lot younger than I am. She's only 40. I am shockingly old.
Sort of moving away from COVID and politics.
And COVID.
Yeah.
I see our time is almost up, so if you have any final questions, this is your chance.
Yes, this is my chance. What's next for Peterson Games going forward?
What we have next going up is we're going to be doing printings of a lot of our past things, and we've been scraping together the scratch to do that. It takes longer because of COVID giving us less income. So there's going to be a bunch of reprints. The next games coming out, we have a bunch of small games, actually, small, inexpensive games. We have a game called Mary the Monster, which is about the Fachan, a Celtic monster you may have heard of, which has one eye and one arm and one leg. So obviously there can only be one Fachan, right? Yeah. So in this game, what you're trying to do is build up your city and keep your neighbors from doing it. So you make giant wooden cutouts of a female Fachan, and he runs over to it to marry her, and he destroys all the cities on the way, wrecking your neighbors. And then so you're building up your city, sending the Fachan around, faking them out to get married, and so it's this weird game. We have a game called Potions and Profits. These are like $10, $15, $20 games. Potions and Profits, in which you work for a giant multinational pharmaceutical company that makes magic potions.
Okay.
And the thing is that some of the potions, the ingredients are ethically suspect, like unicorn horn. Nobody wants to know that you killed a unicorn for the potion. But those potions are really good and make lots of money. So you're like, but if you make a potion using goblin glands, no one cares. about the goblins. But
Yeah.
but that's not as good a potion. So there's this kind of fight. We have I did a tabletop spaceship battle game, tactical, where you are in a spaceship and Jupiter is in the spaceship, and we go against each other, and we're firing secret weapons at each other and blasting it and sending out torpedoes, and you have a little control panel, so we use that. I'm working, as I said, on a role-playing game set in a fantasy thing. Oh, and for Planet Apocalypse, we're doing a source book, which you can order on our website. Mm-hmm. Actually, on the Kickstarter, but it's a Planet Apocalypse source book, and what it is, it's for D&D. But the idea is that if you're playing a role-playing game, sometimes you come to the end of your gaming world because you want to go and play in Dark Heresy or Ravenloft or something. You don't want to play in this world anymore. You want to start a new campaign. So what Planet Apocalypse is, it's a way to destroy your old gaming world. It gives you it has hell rise up with these hideous demons from the Planet Apocalypse game and destroy your world. And the players are hopelessly fighting them, trying to save the world. Everything goes, and some of the evil creatures join the demons, and some run away from them. We don't call them demons; you call them fiends because they're not D&D demons or devils, right? And so it's all about. So you can either use it to destroy your game world with a lot of fun and give it a great send off, or you can use it to see if the players might be able to save the world. Who knows, right? In that case, it's fun. And a third thing, you can just say, I don't want to destroy my game world. I love it too much, but I want these cool new demons and monsters and abilities and spells and magic items. So then it's over 300 pages of this stuff. So it's and it has scenarios in it showing you how to build your campaign. It's not a specific campaign because we don't know what your world is, but it shows how to kick it off, how to end it, what you might do in the middle. So it's I don't think that has been done before in role-playing supplements, having something to literally destroy any campaign world, and that's what we did. So I think
sounds like a big variety of stuff.
Yes, we're almost like a real company now. I've been told people expect all the time that Peterson Games is like this big gaming titan, but we're really small. We have 10 people in us, but I think we have a footprint of a medium-sized company in the hobby way. Everyone's heard of Cthulhu Wars. And one of the other features of our games is that when you sit down at a game convention and you set up one of our games, it attracts attention. People will come over to play Cthulhu Wars with you because they've heard of it and they see these amazing figures and they want to come find out what it's about. So so that's the thing. We're also famous for being but the expense, I think, is defensible because yes, you can buy 4 smaller games for the cost of Cthulhu Wars. But if you're having prime rib, you don't complain that it's more expensive than a McDonald's, right? If you're driving a Cadillac, you don't complain that it's more expensive than a Hyundai. You just suck it up and take the extra stuff. So I don't think every game should be a $100 or $200 Titan on your game shelf, luxury game. But I think there's place on a shelf for 1 or 2 games like that.
Yeah.
And if you like Lovecraft, then Cthulhu Wars is one of them. Here is my gaming shelf. You can see I've gone way.
Wow, gaming shelves.
Yeah, I know it goes on, and this isn't all of them. This is just the ones within good range of the camera. So I've gone way overboard, right? But it is my job.
Yeah, business expenses. Yeah, that's about the end of our time. So thank you so much for letting me interview. This has been really fun.
And I guess I'll be seeing you together tomorrow at 8 my time.
Nope, right? I'm not on that one. I'm not on your panel.
Oh.
So you'll be seeing your other panel people, not me.
Well, I almost made it to the UK Games Expo this year. I was stopped by COVID. So if you go to that, you may be here.
Hopefully next year. I'll come and say hello in person.
Do that.
Yeah. But there'll be links in the description and more information below. So do check those out. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cool. Oh, he left. I didn't think... What? No, that was...